Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Omar Khalid. But today is the 10th of March 2022 and we will be discussing the following during the course of our show. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with, on the one hand, when we see a lot of hue and cry emanating as far as the Ukraine crisis is concerned, nobody, in fact, at this moment in time, really talking about the humanitarian crises that are happening in other parts of the world, with respect, especially this time in our first segment, to Afghanistan and the humanitarian and economic crisis that is engulfing Afghanistan since some time. Now, what has happened is that a member of the European Parliament, Clare Daly, during an intervention on a plenary in the European Parliament earlier this month, said, and I quote, "Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, tens of thousands seek refuge, 5 million children face famine, 500% increase in child marriages, children being sold to feed families, not a mention of it. My God, they must be wondering what makes their humanitarian crisis so important." She was, of course, referring to the other humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. This is going to be our first story, ladies and gentlemen. Our second story concerns the British lawmakers that have called on Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, to use his office to hold New Delhi in India accountable for its inhumane actions as far as Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. We all know what is happening. We all know what the reaction is coming as far as the West is concerned. And this just is one of the very important steps in the right direction as far as highlighting the atrocities of the Indian forces, of the Indian government in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This is going to be our second story of the day. Then, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about then we are going to talk about a heart transplant, ladies and gentlemen, that happened some time back. A patient who had received a pig's heart in an experimental surgery died 2 months later. David Bennett, Sr. of Maryland, he was 57 years of age. In January, he underwent this groundbreaking procedure in which a pig's heart was, of course, transplanted into his body. It did work for some time. At that moment, it was known to be very groundbreaking, a revolutionary step. Nevertheless, it did not work for a long time, and after 2 months, he passed away because the heart stopped working. And then finally, we will talk about the SAP Managing Director, Saqib Ahmed, who has underlined that the government should come up with a long-term policy to stimulate investing in the IT sector, which should also and would also create jobs for the youth. It's very important. A lot of people, especially the youth of our country, are talking about entrepreneurship, are talking about job availability, and this is also one of the steps in the right direction. This is going to be our last story. Let's begin with our first segment, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns what is happening in Afghanistan, the humanitarian crisis, the economic crisis, and as a result, all that is ensuing, all that is being seen by the world, but most of the world is keeping mum on it. Although, on the other hand, when it comes to other crises, the world is on one place, on one stance, and it is moving all ahead. Why is that so? More in the following report.
The grinding poverty and relentless hunger crisis grip Afghanistan as the country was sent into economic freefall, followed by crippling US sanctions. Clare Daly, an Irish politician and incumbent member of the European Parliament, highlighted dire humanitarian situation of Afghanistan in her recent speech. In her scathing criticism of world's disregard for plight of Afghans, Clare Daly noted that 5 million children are facing agonizing and painful death, along with 500% increase in child marriages.
Since the last plenary, tens of thousands of Afghani citizens have been forced to flee in search of food and safety. 5 million children face famine, an agonising and painful death, a 500% increase in child marriages and children being sold just so they can survive, and not a mention of it. Not here, not anywhere. No wall-to-wall TV coverage, no emergency humanitarian response, no special plenaries, not even a mention in this plenary, no Afghani delegations and no statements.
Earlier, the former UK Foreign Secretary and Chief Executive at International Rescue Committee, David Miliband, emphasized that the West has inflicted catastrophic damage on Afghanistan and its own reputation by imposing a policy of starvation on the country. Underlining alarming situation, in January, the UN put out an appeal for $4.4 billion to address immediate food, health and other needs in Afghanistan. Despite ominous warnings of looming humanitarian catastrophe, on February 11th, US President Joe Biden moved to seize $3.5 billion in frozen Afghan central bank assets and reallocate them to address ongoing legitimate mobilization by U.S. victims of attacks by armed groups. The foreign ministers of Pakistan and China have urged the world not to forget the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan because of novel geopolitical trends. Despite generous pledges made by various entities, world's attention from Afghanistan is shifting, thereby leaving the Afghans to bear the brunt of economic meltdown.
Brigadier retired Saad Mohammed, who's a senior analyst, a defense analyst as well, joins us online. Brigadier Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Brigadier Saab, when you look at the whole global scenario or the regional scenario, you look and you hear and you see a lot of hue and cry and a lot of steps being taken as far as other regional issues are concerned. But people seem to have forgotten Afghanistan. Why is that so?
You know, the West looks at things from a very different perspective. Regardless of their rhetoric, you know, that they are democracies and they are sensitive to the plight of people and the how the people react. But they are only concerned with their own issues. Now, it is not very surprising because if you go back in time, you go back to 1989. Now, you look at the situation just before the Soviet withdrawal, which was completed in February of 1989, and you travel back to 1979 to 1989, and you see that places like Peshawar were full of international NGOs with millions of dollars of funds available, looking after the Afghan refugees and providing them all the assistance that they required. And suddenly, 1989, after the Soviet withdrawal, everybody packs up and leaves, and the Afghan refugees, of which over 5 million were in Pakistan, they were left in the lurch, and there was nobody to look after them, and they had to fend for themselves. Afghanistan sank into a civil war. Nobody cared. And in that civil war, Afghanistan became a base for international terrorists, and we saw the catastrophic events of 9/11. Again, the same thing was repeated. Now, despite that, no Afghan had taken part in the 9/11 attacks, and that the Taliban government was willing to discuss the involvement of Al-Qaeda and some of the leaders that were present in Afghanistan to find a way out. The United States and its NATO allies attacked Afghanistan, occupied it, spent $1 trillion, killed thousands and thousands of Afghans, killed so many thousands of Pakistanis also at the same time, then left, and the same Taliban are now back in business. Now look at the callousness of this US administration, that instead of helping these poor Afghans whom they attacked, invaded, occupied, killed, out of that $3.5 billion, which you just mentioned, have gone to the litigation of those Americans who suffered the 9/11 attacks, and which the Afghans had nothing to do.
And the money belongs to the Afghan people. On top of that, the money belongs to the Afghan people. That is just 3.5 of the 7 billion. There are $2 billion that are in other banks as well.
And they accuse Al-Qaeda of, masterminding the terrorist attacks of 9/11. Now, if anybody had to pay up for something, was Saudi Arabia, which is their ally. And for them, paying $3.5 billion is no big deal. But asking the poor people of Afghanistan, out of which today in Afghanistan, 1/3 of the people do not know whether they are going to get from the next meal from. At least 1/3 of the population of Afghanistan today is displaced, either internally or in foreign countries.
Brigadier Saab, I'd like to ask you a very pertinent question with regards to all that you have narrated as far as the past is concerned, 79 to 89, and now we are in 2022. Is history repeating itself?
It has always repeated itself like this. You know, the West will always, you look at in 89, what was the issue which attracted the attention of the Western countries who were so involved in Afghanistan prior to that? Was the unification of Germany and the cracks that were appearing in the Soviet Union. Today, it is the Ukraine war which is, more important to them. The refugees from Ukraine, and they're also in the refugees. The complexion of the man's skin is more important than how he is. Food is provided to the man who is white complexioned. Allowing them across the borders is permitted only for those people who have white complexion. So the American occupation and the NATO occupation of Afghanistan had nothing to do with the Afghans. or the plight of the Afghans, whom the Americans accused the Taliban regime of, violating basic fundamental rights, because the fundamental rights violated by the United States, the bombings that they carried out, the children that they killed. I don't think so. The Taliban were ever guilty of
Now let's talk
committing
of
such
the, you
atrocities.
talked about the crisis, you talked about the humanitarian issues that were faced then and that are being faced now. And I'd like to quote what Clare Daly, who is a member of the European Parliament, said in the beginning of the month while, of course, addressing a 1-minute speech on matters of political importance. I'd like to quote some of what she said and then we'll discuss that further. She said, since the last plenary, tens of thousands of Afghani citizens have been forced to flee in search of food and safety. 5 million children face famine and agonizing and painful deaths. A 5% increase in child marriages, children being sold just so that they can survive. And not a mention of it, not here, not anywhere. I'd like your opinion on this. No mention of all of this happening. Only we see Pakistan and Pakistani media and our government talking about it and highlighting this on different fora. Why isn't the West, highlighting this? Isn't this more than an economic tragedy? Isn't this a humanitarian crisis? Isn't that one of the human rights issues that is engulfing a country that a very important country in the West had occupied for 2 decades?
The West, despite its lip service to human rights, it is not concerned with human rights. If it was concerned with human rights, more atrocities were committed by the Indian forces in Kashmir. Have they ever talked about it? They never talk about these things. They only talk about those things which they feel is in their interests, and they want to use human rights and all these other nice sounding words as an instrument to beat their opponents with. They're not concerned with human rights, or they're not concerned with hunger. They're very callous people. And both times when they came into Afghanistan, they didn't come here to help the people of Afghanistan or to free them from the yoke of the Soviet Union or from the yoke of the Taliban. They came here for their own personal and country's interest. They came here, they killed people, they went away, and they forgot both times. Now, this is a lesson for us, for Pakistan, that we should not trust these people anymore. Next time they talk about human rights and they want to free people or bring democracy, look what they have done in Libya. They have destroyed that country and gone. What they have done in Syria, destroyed that country and gone. Look at what happened in Iraq. They destroyed that country and went back. In Afghanistan, we are talking about. So there is no such thing as democracy or human rights. What suits them. If it suits them that they should support, use human rights as a tool, they would use it. Otherwise, in genuine conditions like Kashmir, for example, they will never be bothered. They will be bothered about something happening in Xinjiang. I don't know whether there's something happening there or not, but they're using that as a tool to beat China with. But they will not talk about next door Kashmir, where the Indian forces are, violating the rights of the human beings, like as if they are some subhuman species. This has to stop. The West has
Brigadier
to,
Saab, last month
Pakistan
also
and other countries must get together and fight this.
Pakistan is, you remember the OIC special conference that was held of the Council of Foreign Ministers that was held in December last year, was in fact to highlight the Afghan issue and for all the Muslim countries to come as one to forge some kind of a solution as far as the Afghan crisis is concerned. I'd like to also refer to the different sects of the society in Afghanistan who are protesting against this decision on the division of assets as far as the Afghan assets are concerned by the United States. And I would like to refer to one of those protests that was held by the Afghan professors and the teachers who said that this money is there, that it needs to go to them instead of going elsewhere. When you talk about interests, when you talk of other interests that supersede the humanitarian or economic interests for countries such as Afghanistan, do you feel, and I'd like to ask you very blatantly, that all that we hear and see in the last few decades as far as the West getting together to work on humanitarian issues is concerned is all but a front for their own geopolitical or geostrategic interests, as we are seeing now in Ukraine?
Yes, I fully agree with that. Now, those geopolitical interests that you're talking about serve their economies. They start a war. Everywhere you see their geopolitical interest will start a war. Now, you just look at the Ukrainian crisis. they are the ones who, invited the Russians to come into Ukraine and start a war. It suits their interests to start wars at various places. It is the United States and its allies, they want to start wars because it helps their economies. What they
Defense
do, they
machinery,
spend,
sir, is it also helping their defense machinery?
Their military industrial complex, like one of the US President Eisenhower, I think, if I'm not wrong, he said the political side of the United States democracy is the musical, group for the military industrial complex. The military industrial complex benefits, for example, in Iraq, the United States spent about $12 to $13 billion and earned about $50 billion. From the war reparations and the oil that they sold on the international market, saying that, they spent money freeing Iraq, and Iraq destroyed a peaceful country and what it made into. The Taliban were not responsible for what happened in 9/11. They nowhere, even their own inquiry that they conducted, did the Taliban government come into, being referred to somewhere that they helped the 9/11. And despite that, Afghanistan was attacked. They want to, apart from that, it helps their economies to start war. They also try their latest weaponry on live targets. That's the callousness of their, attitude towards human life. A European life will matter. War in Europe matters to them. But war in Afghanistan, war in Iraq, war because where there's a non-white person being killed by live firing, they'll say collateral damage. They killed 50 children in a bombing raid in Afghanistan, and the statement comes out, we regret the collateral damage that happened, but we worked on, on an intelligence which was very accurate. Now, if it was accurate, how did you kill 50 children? They've attacked marriage parties, and they say it's collateral damage. Now, that is the problem, that the West has no human rights, no democracy for other people. That's only for their internal, politics. Otherwise, they're not concerned with other atrocities being committed any part of the world, or human rights being violated, or people going hungry.
All right, Brigadier Saab, I'd also like to divert your attention towards Ma'am Clare Daly, because it's not the first time that she has talked about the plight of the people in Afghanistan. Last month also, while addressing the European Parliament, she said that Biden's theft, and she talked about, of course, the division of the $7 billion US, will mean millions of Afghans suffering and dying for a crime that had nothing to do with them. It makes me sick, she said. Shame on the US for its crimes against humanity, and shame on the European Union for its complicity and silence. She is just one of the very small number of people who talks, maybe, in my point of view, or maybe in your point of view sense. Why are there not more people talking about it in fora such as the European Parliament, in fora such as the United Nations?
Because it doesn't suit their interests. The West will only spend money or come to someone's aid when it suits their interest, or where they can, get benefit out of it. And supposing they use money to in a military operation or in humanitarian aid also. They have provided humanitarian aid, but they provide it if it suits their interests. For example, in Darfur, it suited their interest to divide Sudan and separate southern Sudan from the main country. So there the humanitarian aid will come, there the United Nations will come, but it will not come in a place like Afghanistan after the withdrawal, after the Soviet withdrawal, after the American withdrawal. It will not come here because it does not suit their interest. They will not spend a penny. And this lady who you are referring to, I'm sure she is also not very serious about it. These type of voices, they keep coming up just to tell us, that in the West it is so free that they can criticize their government if there is something going on like this. She will just speak for one day, and then she disappears, and after that there'll be nothing. And neither are they bothered what is happening in Afghanistan. They talk about, helping people and humanitarian. Look at Pakistan. We are hosting 3 million registered refugees. And I'm sure this is half the number, because there are equal number who are unregistered, working here in Pakistan. And Pakistan is providing humanitarian assistance to the Afghans. I think no other country has provided the humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan than Pakistan.
Finally, Brigadier Saab, now looking at the current situation, and of course we've talked about the past as well, the context in which Afghanistan is embroiled in the current humanitarian and economic crisis that it is. What is the way forward? What is the role of Pakistan? What is the role of other important countries that genuinely care about the plight of the people in Afghanistan, like for example China, like for example other countries in the region? What would you suggest are the points, and are we moving in the right direction as far as Pakistan's endeavors are concerned?
I think Pakistan is moving in the right direction, and the hosting of the OIC's Foreign Ministers Special Conference here in Islamabad was a very important step Pakistan had taken to ensure that the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan remains under control. Unfortunately, we have not seen much of development because most of the so-called Islamic countries are also, not helping us to how to deal with the situation in Afghanistan. I hope they wake up and they do so and provide some assistance there. After all, if not Muslims, at least human beings who must be helped. They are hungry, they are sick, they must be looked after. It's heartbreaking to see the conditions in Afghanistan. However, Pakistan cannot do it alone. Recognition of the present government in Afghanistan, Pakistan cannot do it alone. It has to do it with consensus. Now, the West at this point in time, I don't think so is interested in that. But there are other countries. We have China, we have Russia, we have certain other countries out of the Islamic bloc also. We will be having certain countries. In Africa, there will be certain countries. In Southeast Asia, we will be having some countries, which can start off by making a group and recognize the present Afghan regime. They're a reality. They're a de facto government on ground. So they have to be recognized. We can't wish them away. If we can do that, I think Pakistan must work towards that. That first we create a consensus among some countries of the world, some important countries of the world, so that we go towards the recognition. After the government is recognized, then the other humanitarian assistance to that country can become easier.
That is so true, and I really hope, that this happens sooner than later. Afghanistan, every day that passes, sir, and I'm sure you agree with me on that, is getting more and more embroiled in this humanitarian economic crisis. The money needs to reach very soon so that they can buy the food, so that they can buy the products for their daily livelihoods. They need to survive, and this, sir, in this day and age, it's a time of survival for those Afghan people who are just living across our border. Pakistan can only do as much as it can, and it needs to be helped, as you yourself said, by other countries across the world, other countries that are genuinely concerned about the plight of the Afghan people. Thank you very much, sir, to have joined us and to have talked to us about this very, very important issue that Pakistan is also extremely concerned about. Let's come to our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, and our second segment concerns the blatant violations of human rights in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Now, a group of British parliamentarians, members of parliament, have apprised Boris Johnson, who is the British Prime Minister, about the plight of the people in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and of course they have asked him to take necessary steps to alleviate their suffering. More in the following report.
In the name of preserving law and order, sexual violence, illegal detentions and lynching Muslims have become a daily routine in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. British lawmakers recently joined the Kashmiri diaspora and their allies to urge the government of United Kingdom to force India to halt its inhumane actions and end its occupation over Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Several British politicians joined Tehreek-e-Kashmir UK to submit a petition to Prime Minister Boris Johnson urging his government to speak about human rights violations, including violations of women's rights in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The petition included reports prepared by various independent and non-governmental international organizations on the violence perpetrated by Indian occupation forces against Kashmiri women, was signed by parliamentarians and the general public, urging them to use their influence to stop the genocide of Kashmiris. In a meeting, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi with UN High Commissioner of Human Rights Michelle Bachelet highlighted the increasing violations in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir concerning illegal demographic changes, reprisal attacks against human rights defenders, extrajudicial killings, fake encounters, and the clear pattern of impunity enjoyed by Indian occupation forces. According to the investigative research by UK law firm Stockwhite Investigations, not a single military person has been charged despite more than 3 decades of Indian army violence and human rights abuses in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir has been the worst victims of Indian state terrorism. Experts warn that atrocities against civilians and illegal alterations of demography are India's ongoing war crimes in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Given the precarious situation in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, it has become even more important for the international community to take immediate action against the plight of innocent Kashmiri people.
Hamid Al-Mashriqi, who's an analyst, joins us online. Hamid, thank you very much to have joined us. Hamid, what is happening in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is no secret. This is nothing that has been hidden. It is in front of the entire world. And I say it again and again, and I've been asked talking to you about this same issue in the past as well. Now that the British members of parliament have also apprised Boris Johnson, who I am sure knows about the plight of the Kashmiri people, will he take any action?
Thank you very much, Omar. This is a very positive step taken by the British parliamentarians who are from the ruling party. That's the main thing, because since there were many efforts, but those were from the Labour Party, but they are from the Tory parties, which is a very good thing. But I would say that this is an ideal time for the European Union and for the UK people to know that what real atrocities are doing in Kashmir, because they are giving the examples of situation in Ukraine. They are giving the example of a 6-year-old, young girl got, under bombardment of the Russian forces or anything. What about the Kashmiris? This is the time when we have a classic case to explain the world that what atrocities are affecting the nation of Kashmiris, what is Indian illegally occupied Kashmiris going through. And this was the exact objective, and these parliamentarians, including James Daly and others, I know them personally, and I have been doing lobbying for Kashmiris for the last few years. And just before I came to Pakistan, I spoke to them, and they were preparing this meeting. And this is a very effective step before the general elections in the UK, because they need to explain the Pakistani and Kashmiri diaspora in England that either they are going to do anything about the Kashmiris, or they're going to leave it as it is since the revocation of Article 370 and 35A. This is the time when Pakistan needs to explain the world as well, and especially to the European Member of Parliament, especially to the British Member of Parliament. And if you look into the entire situation, I always give the example that when there was internet off of Ukraine for 24 hours, and they got restored by Elon Musk within 24 hours. What about the deprivement of Kashmiris? For the last 3 years, they don't have internet. They do not even have clean water now. They are going through a war zone 24/7, and they are having over 1 million Indian troops on their heads. Every 7th Kashmiri is under a gun by an Indian occupied soldier. And this is the situation which world needs to understand, that now it is not the time to do any more hypocrisy. That is the thing. If they want the world to talk about Ukraine, then the world has to talk about Kashmir. The world has to talk about Palestine. The world has to talk about Afghanistan and
so good,
Hamid,
to be very frank between the two of us, and I'm sure our viewers would agree with us as well, it looks very good when we talk about these issues. It looks very good when it comes on paper. But, it all depends on the action at the end of the day that needs to be taken in order to alleviate the plight of the people. Now, this is not the first time that the British members of parliament have talked to the British government as far as the plight of the Kashmiri people is concerned. This is just another of the steps that are being taken by the members of the British parliament. Nevertheless, no action is being taken, and I'm sure no action will again be taken this time. But as you said, it could work because there is a political pressure on the British government as we speak, that if they do not comply with them, maybe they might lose the vote bank of the British Kashmiris, yes, and those British Pakistanis who are settled there. What is your take on that?
Yes, definitely. There are over 1.5 million Muslims and Pakistani Muslims and Kashmiris in UK, and there are about 10 to 15 constituencies where their votes are decisive factor, especially in northwest of United Kingdom. This is Kashmiri and Pakistani votes are decisive factor for so many constituencies, and this is where they are working on it. But I think so. There is a need of unity in our Pakistani community in UK. There is a need of unity in Kashmiri community in UK, and they need to give a loud and clear message to the ruling party, to the Boris Johnson, that they have to talk about, they have to speak about the plight of Kashmiris. They have to kind of come with some kind of sanctions or proposals against Modi regime, that they will realize that they cannot take it so easily now, and they will be answerable to the British Parliament as well. And British Constitution is so clear. British Parliament, if it only works within their own constitutional lines, I can tell you there will be so many sanctions which could have been implemented on India because of human rights violations, because of depriving the rights of the minorities, because of atrocities what India is doing in Kashmir. So there are so many points, and I would like to remind you that the British law firm already filed a suit against Modi and Indian Army Chief and Indian Interior Minister. So all that is with the over 2,000 evidences of the atrocities of Indian occupied forces, and it is a very classic case of war crimes of Modi and Indian Army is doing in Kashmir. So all we need is to keep pushing the current British government and tell them that if they do not take the actions against Indian government, despite of their economical interests, despite of their relations, despite of trying to sign an agreement with them for trade agreement and other things, but the Kashmir issue has to become in the limelight to discuss about it. It will at least reduce the atrocities in Kashmir. We want the atrocities needs to be reduced because people are suffering badly economically and socially, and they are having everyday encounters, illegal encounters.
Now, also going a little bit beyond the British government and the British parliamentarians who have made a very right step in the right direction, not only talking about the atrocities, but also the rapes of the women, the girls in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, because of course this was in conjunction with the International Women's Day as well. And whether it be Raja Fahim Kiani Sahab, who's the president of the Tehreek-e-Kashmir UK, or other members of the parliament, they were all on one voice as far as the atrocities against the people in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and the steps that need to be taken are concerned. Also, our Foreign Minister Hamid Qureshi Sahab also met with Michelle Bachelet. Now, he, amongst other things, he did highlight the Kashmir issue, the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, but also he talked about Kashmir. And when he talked about Kashmir, he highlighted certain points that I'd like to have your take on it. He talked about the increasing violations in the valley with respect to 6 things. A, illegal demographic changes, reprisal attacks against human rights defenders, extrajudicial killings, fake encounters, destruction of property, and a clear pattern of impunity that is enjoyed by Indian occupation forces under the draconian laws. These are 6 very important points. But what I want to I'll take your point on it, your take on it, is how important is the United Nations role in all of this? Because there are 2 reports that have come out of the Human Rights, United Nations Human Rights Council in the past as well on the plight of the people in Kashmir. But have we seen any action?
Unfortunately, no. We have not seen any constructive action by United Nations or by European Union or by British Parliament. And especially it is a responsibility of United Nations being guarantor for the right of self-determination for the Kashmiri since 1948. This is the ethical and this is the moral responsibility and obligation of United Nations to take action against India. But the only thing is we Muslim countries are lacking to push enough pressure on it. I mean, I would like to remind you that in 2019-20, when the 370 was revoked, I took some of British parliamentarians from Muzaffarabad to Chakoti, and we showed everything to the Red Cross. We showed them that what Indians are doing across the line of control, and they could not believe on their eyes that they were doing firing. They were they were violating ceasefire and everything. So we have so many evidences given directly to the United Nations and directly to the so many parliamentarians through our dossiers. Pakistan Foreign Office is doing enough. And I mean, despite of these 6 points given by Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi, there are 2 more points which needs to be highlighted now. One is delimitation, which is changing the constitutional division of the constitutionally division of the Kashmir, and it is trying to manipulate with the figures where they will be able to have higher number of seats from the Hindu majority constituencies within Jammu and Kashmir, so that they can have a kind of a different legislative assembly in Kashmir. Secondly, they are with issuing the over 4 million domiciles and with selling the properties to the elite of India like Ambanis and Tatas and Birlas. They are selling the land of the Kashmir to the Indians. And this is what exactly the Palestine and Israel model they are copying. This is what they are copying from Israel. So these are the three another points which Pakistan Foreign Office needs to raise all the time, because this is a very long-term planning from this current Modi government, that if at one time they would be forced to do the plebiscite, they should be in the position they want to be in the position.
But that is what they are doing. I mean, they are moving in a direction in which, when they can hold the plebiscite, that the majority will be the non-Muslims, the non-residents, the actually non-residents of the Indian illegally occupied valley, and that is how the numbers will be completely changed as to what was the real numbers, what was the real figure a couple of years back.
Exactly. This is what their effort is. This is what they are trying to do, that they are trying to change the figure of Muslim majority into Hindu or non-Muslim majority, so they can say to the world and one day that, oh, they have done the plebiscite, and now the plebiscite is saying that the people of Kashmir wants to live with India, which will be a complete blunt lie. And it is not possible that the people of the Kashmir, Muslims of the Kashmir, which is over 80% of the population, will accept it. This is the thing world, Pakistan and the Muslim world needs to make the rest of the world know, that this kind of cunning, this kind of plans are not going to work from India. This kind of work are not going to be acceptable for the Kashmiris or for
That
Pakistan.
Is true. Hamid Saab, one final question. You talked, I mean, our Prime Minister, our Foreign Minister have been talking over and over again at all the different fora possible about the plight of the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. What more, in your point of view, can Pakistan do?
There are 2-3 things more. Again, I would say that Pakistan has successfully conducted, and again is going to conduct, foreign minister session for Afghanistan
later this month.
Pakistan has to do it in a Muslim foreign minister session for Afghanistan issue. Why not Pakistan do it for the Kashmir issue now? Pakistan has to try. I know it is not an easy task, but Pakistan Foreign Office needs to keep trying. On the second point, I would say that all the Pakistani embassies or high commissions or consulates, they should keep exposing Indian atrocities in terms of doing maximum workshops, conferences, because I believe that American and British people do not know exactly what India is doing. Sometimes they feel that it is only like kind of a minor thing and it is been hyped. No, it is not been hyped. Rather, they need to know what exactly atrocities Indian illegal occupied Kashmir, Indian army is doing, Indian forces are doing. So I think we need to keep them aware through our media, because Indian media is misguiding and misleading the rest of the world. So Pakistani media and Pakistani consulates, Pakistani institutions has to prepare a counter strategy for that.
Well, Hamid Saab, our network, at least Pakistan Television, it's doing its utmost as far as highlighting the plight of the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and for the Muslims of India, for that matter, also the other minorities in India as far as this is concerned, and also for the Afghan issue. We try to highlight, of course, the responsibilities also on the other networks to highlight it even more than what they are doing and more often. Thank you very much, Hamid Khan Al-Mushtaki Saab, analyst, who have joined us, who have talked to us about this latest move by the British members of Parliament in order to apprise the British Prime Minister about the plight of the people in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, especially with reference to what is happening to the women and the girls in that region. Thank you very much, Hamid Saab. Let's come to our last two stories very quickly. The first is about a pig heart transplant. We all know this happened a couple of months back when a patient had received a pig's heart as a transplant, and of course things apparently were moving in the right direction for this 57-year-old man, David Bennett Sr. of Maryland in the United States. Nevertheless, he passed away 2 months later, and the doctors, although have not really specified the real reason behind it, but they were saying that the heart was getting weaker in the last few days. Of course, this points out to the fact that maybe this is not a perfect solution as far as transplant is concerned. Maybe we humans need a human transplant, or maybe there might be an artificial heart made with such precision in the future that it could easily be transplanted into any human being. Let's see and let's hope for the best. Technology is moving extremely rapidly as far as science is concerned. And then, ladies and gentlemen, let's come to our final story of the day, and that concerns the IT sector of Pakistan. The managing director of the SAP, Saqib Ahmed Saab, while talking to journalists, has said that the government should come up with a long-term policy to stimulate and simulate investment in the IT sector, which would also create jobs for the youth. He said that IT companies are worried about inconsistency in policies, although Pakistan is a big market for the IT sector. He also talked about cloud services. He talked about the quality of human resources, that people usually move out of the country, they need to be brought back, and for that the conducive environment needs to be put forward. We have the STZ and the STZA here that is working in the right direction as far as that is concerned. The IT is, of course, the future, and it's a huge sector that Pakistan's economy can get a lot of boost from, and of course Pakistan's IT ministry is working in that right direction as well. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with news stories and segments that pertain to us, you and Pakistan. The number of COVID cases, ladies and gentlemen, have decreased from before. Nevertheless, they are still here of people getting COVID-19, them and their families. So despite the fact that the cases are decreasing, keep following the standard operating procedures, keep washing your hands, wearing the mask in crowded places, and of course get yourselves vaccinated and boosted whenever it is necessary. With that, we come to an end. See you inshallah tomorrow. Allah Hafiz.